I knew this guy back in college. We weren't super close, but we'd shared a few classes, worked on some group projects together, and hung out enough that I'd call him a friend. One day, he starts telling me about this girl he met online. According to him, she was special. Not just attractive, but smart, funny, and into all the same niche games and shows he was into. He said they talked every day for hours. The way he described it, they had a real connection, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. The only problem? She lived about 6 hours away by car. Still, he was convinced she was the one. So convinced, in fact, that he made the decision to take a semester off from school to pursue the relationship. He told me he found a job in her town and was planning to move there to be closer to her, to finally take things to the next level. Then he asked me for a favor. Since my car could carry more than he could take on a bus, he wanted me to help him move. I had a long weekend off and thought, why not? A road trip could be fun, and it'd be a good way to send him off. Plus, I was planning to swing by Yellowstone on the way back, so it wasn't a big detour for me. We loaded up my car and hit the road, but when we arrived, things unraveled fast. First red flag. He didn't have an apartment lined up. I asked him where he was staying, and he gave me this awkward smile and said, I was going to figure that out when we got here. Okay, weird, but not a deal breaker yet. Then I asked about the job, and it turned out he hadn't actually gotten it, or applied. He'd just seen a job posting for a position in her town and assumed he'd landed easily once he showed up. At this point, I was already annoyed. He had uprooted his entire life and dragged me 6 hours away on a fantasy built on literally nothing. Still, I didn't want to leave him stranded, so I spent the rest of the afternoon making calls. Eventually, I found him a room to rent that would let him move in that day with just first month's rent, last month's rent, and a deposit, even without proof of employment. I was tired, frustrated, and honestly just disgusted by his complete lack of planning. But I decided to stay the night and leave things on a good note. That night, we sat in his barely furnished room, eating gas station snacks, when he suddenly went quiet. Then he broke down. I need to tell you something, he said, eyes welling up. I braced myself. He confessed, and this floored me, that he had never actually met this girl. Not once. They'd never talked, never texted, never emailed. He didn't follow her on social media, hadn't commented on her videos, hadn't even liked a single post. The hours he claimed to spend video chatting with her, he was just watching her vlogs on YouTube and pleasuring himself. She didn't know he existed. His plan, and I swear I'm not making this up, was to start hanging around a local game shop she had mentioned a few times in her videos, hoping she'd show up. And from there, he thought they'd just click, fall in love. She'd move back with him to our college town. They'd get married, all before the next semester started. I just stared at him. Nothing I said could bring him back to reality. He was so deep in his delusion, so convinced this would work out that logic didn't even register. I didn't even stay the full night. The next morning, I drove him to the bus station, made him buy a ticket back to school, and left. I visited Yellowstone alone, trying to shake off the whole experience. He came back to college eventually, but he didn't grow from it. If anything, he got worse. More awkward, more obsessive, more out of touch. I stopped talking to him soon after, and honestly, I have no idea what happened to him. And I don't really want to know. Back during the heyday of World of Warcraft's second expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, I was in my early 20s, living in a modest one-bedroom apartment in a small city, working a tech support job I hated, and spending most of my free time online, like many of us did in those days. My social circle existed almost entirely within the confines of WoW's servers. I wasn't proud of that, but it was what it was. That's how I met Jared. Jared was one of those guys who kind of just slipped into your life. He didn't join my guild directly through me. He He came in through someone else, a friend of a friend, and slowly started hanging around. I barely noticed him at first. His DPS was average, his presence in guild chat unremarkable. But over time, we started talking more during raids, then outside of raids, then in private messages. Eventually, we were chatting daily. He was a funny guy in that deeply sarcastic, deadpan way that people online often are. We bonded over bad puns, obscure game lore, and a mutual distaste for elitist raid leaders. At some point, we added each other on MSN Messenger, which tells you just how long ago this was, and started talking beyond just WoW. That's when I learned about his roommate. At first, Jared would just mention him in passing. Ugh, the asshole's screaming again. Or, hope my mic didn't pick that up, he's flipping out. But the more we talked, the more vivid the picture became. His roommate wasn't just annoying, he was a nightmare. Apparently, whenever Jared would mess something up in a raid, or even when nothing went wrong at all, you could hear this guy in the background yelling. Not just annoyed yelling, but full on. Veins popping, furniture shaking, screaming. I'd be in Discord, listening to Jared whisper call out mechanics, and in the background, this voice would erupt like thunder, cursing, slamming doors, knocking over God knows what. It wasn't long before Jared admitted what I'd already suspected. The guy wasn't just obnoxious. He was abusive. Verbally, mostly, but there were hints that it had crossed into physical territory too. Jared would never go into detail, but there were stories that didn't quite add up. A broken laptop screen. A black eye explained away by bumping into a door. Stuff that made me uneasy. And Jared. He never asked for help. That was part of what made me want to offer it. I was living alone. I had a spare futon, a tiny kitchen, Wi-Fi, and an open mind. So one night, after yet another post-raid rant from the background monster, I messaged him, "Dude, just come crash at my place. Seriously, get out of there." I meant it as a kind of spontaneous offer, like the kind of thing you say when someone you care about is suffering. I didn't expect him to take it literally, but he did. 2 days later, Jared was on my doorstep. He didn't have much. A black trash bag stuffed with clothes, a worn-out backpack, and his laptop. That was it. No suitcase, no boxes, no plan. He looked tired, pale, but oddly relieved. I helped him carry his things in, gave him the futon, showed him where the towels and the coffee were, and that was that. For the first week or so, it felt kind of good. Like I had done the right thing. We ordered pizza, stayed up playing co-op games, talked about life, about our pasts, about where we thought things were going. He was grateful, or at least he said so. And I felt like maybe I'd actually made a difference. But then, the second week came, and the third, and Jared never even mentioned looking for a job. At first, I thought he was just taking time to recover, you know? Coming out of an abusive situation is traumatic. I didn't want to be the guy who pushed him too hard, but then the food started disappearing faster. The dishes were always mine. The electricity bill jumped, and I was the one paying it. I dropped casual hints like, "Hey, there's a job fair downtown next week." Or, "I saw a help wanted sign at the diner near here." He always had an excuse. He was tired, he wasn't ready. The economy sucked. He didn't have clothes nice enough for interviews. Once, he even said, "Well, my social anxiety's really bad right now." And that was a tough one, because I got that. I really did, so I gave him more time. By month 2, I was getting nervous. My savings, not that I had much to begin with, were running low. I was eating ramen so he could eat the stuff in the fridge. I'd cut my own Netflix account and was stealing my cousin's just to keep the evenings manageable. I'd come home from work and find him right where I left him. On the futon, laptop on his belly, watching anime or playing WoW or whatever. He wouldn't even look up sometimes. Eventually, I snapped. I didn't yell. I'm not the yelling type. But I sat him down and said, point blank, "Jared, I can't do this anymore. You need to find a job, like this week, or start planning where you're going next." He didn't argue. He didn't even seem surprised. Just nodded. said, "Yeah, okay," and went back to his laptop. The next day, I came home and he was gone. No note, no text, just gone. And a few things missing. Not huge things, but things that stung. My spare Xbox controller, a couple of Steam gift cards I'd left on my desk, my favorite hoodie, the gray one with the faded Triforce on it. Just enough to make it obvious. Just enough to piss me off. I tried calling, no answer, messaging him in WOW, nothing. It was like he'd vanished. But the internet is small, especially the World of Warcraft internet. Over the next couple of weeks, I started hearing from others, people in the guild, mutual friends from other games, that Jared had done this before. Not exactly the same way, but similar enough. He'd bounce from couch to couch, telling stories about being abused, about how he just needed a place to land, and people would take him in, people who meant well. I was just the latest in a line of temporary stops. And that roommate? The one I'd heard yelling in the background? Apparently, he wasn't even that bad. A bit of a jerk, sure. Loud. But Jared played him up for sympathy. Used him as a mask to hide behind. I don't know how much of the abuse story was real, but the fact that I still don't know. That's what bugs me the most. Eventually, I found out he'd called an aunt to come pick him up. She lived a couple hours away. When she arrived at my place, I happened to be outside taking out the trash, and I swear to God, the way she looked at me, like I was something she scraped off her shoe. I'll never forget it. I don't know what he told her, but it sure as hell wasn't the truth. The last I heard, he was living with his sister and her husband. Maybe still couch surfing. Maybe still telling stories. Honestly, I don't care anymore. He stole from me. He lied to me. He took advantage of my kindness. And it'll be the first and last time I ever do something like that. I never actually met the guy, but spoke to him on the phone. We'd met on MySpace when I was in college and exchanged email addresses when we realized we lived in the same town. Eventually, I gave him my phone number and made plans for him to call me. When he did, his voice creeped me out. It was how I imagined a serial killer would sound. By the time I got past it and was comfortable talking to him on the phone, I started noticing other red flags. Whenever I brought the neighborhood up, he changed the subject. At one point, I asked him what his favorite restaurant on the boulevard was, and he hedged. So I made up a restaurant that I said was my favorite. He immediately said that was his favorite too, and that he especially loved one of their dishes. He went on and on about this wonderful place that didn't exist, and there wasn't a similar one in town, so he couldn't be confused. I called him out on the fact that he'd obviously never been to my neighborhood. Turned out, he didn't even live in the same state as me. I never actually met the guy, but spoke to him on the phone. We'd met on MySpace when I was in college and exchanged email addresses when we realized we lived in the same town. Eventually, I gave him my phone number and made plans for him to call me. When he did, his voice creeped me out. It was how I imagined a serial killer would sound. By the time I got past it and was comfortable talking to him on the phone, I started noticing other red flags. Whenever I brought the neighborhood up, he changed the subject. At one point, I asked him what his favorite restaurant on the boulevard was, and he hedged. So I made up a restaurant that I said was my favorite. He immediately said that was his favorite too, and that he especially loved one of their dishes. He went on and on about this wonderful place that didn't exist, and there wasn't a similar one in town, so he couldn't be confused. I called him out on the fact that he'd obviously never been to my neighborhood. Turned out he didn't even live in the same state as me.